I'm whipping the soul out it. Chin the toe when I'm flexing like Pilates. Why you frontin', you act like you somebody. Keep it trailing the view how I go by. I was stuck in the rut, I was nobody. I've been looking for something to go body. There's an art to the hustle like yo got it. Kick out a kid back and hit like a new shotty. In the whipping, I'm whipping the soul out it. Chin the toe when I'm.
Yo, what's going on, Titan Clan? It is your boy King Titan X here, back with another video. This video is going to be special because of the fact that this is going to be the finale of the Spawn series. Now, in the last play, we basically left off on Izuku being arrested by the UA staff willingly this time around, and they would basically be interrogating him. Although what ended up happening in the process is that they would end up making a deal with Izuku. This deal would be that he would actually be working alongside UA in exchange for the protection of his family members. The main family members this time around being, well, Inko and his little sister. Yamakumo. I believe that's her name. I honestly forgot. But while this is going on, though, something else will be happening in the background, the shadows, you could say. You see, this stunt that Izuku pulled off at the USJ would not go unnoticed by the likes of Shigaraki and All For One. All For One would have asked how the USJ went, and Shigaraki would have stated that it was pretty terrible, to be honest, because of the fact that this strange cloaked figure that went by the name Spawn just appeared out of nowhere and started fighting the Nomu. All For One would grow curious about this person, someone that wasn't All Might, that was actually fighting the Nomu. At first he was expecting that they were going to lose tremendously, horribly, but Shigaraki actually told him the opposite. As a matter of fact, this guy just seemed to be growing stronger as the battle progressed. This really interested All For One, especially when Shigaraki ended up mentioning how he started growing horns from out of nowhere, and on top of that he was even turning his cloak into an axe. He was gaining muscle mass, he was becoming larger than before, he was even shooting flames at the guy. On top of that, he was even able to control the earth for some time as well. All of these different abilities he was showcasing, even teleportation and portal creation. At first, Shigaraki only knew about one person being able to create portals, and that was, well, Kurogiri, the warp gate master. But, well, apparently there was a new person in town that could do the same thing, and he did it quite lethally as well. He didn't really understand how this worked. All For One was kind of interested in Izuku as well. He wanted to know more about this kid, want to learn more about this Spawn person, you could say. He didn't necessarily know his actual name at the time, but he would get that information soon enough. No matter how much UA would try and hide this information about the existence of Izuku, no matter how much he tried, he would always get this sort of information. He had moles within UA, moles that were well hidden. They would never be discovered by the staff at UA, not easily, at the very least. It would require some of the smartest minds to really try and decode who was actually the UA traitor. But while this would be going on, another thing would be happening. The sports festival. You see, even with the USJ happening, UA would still try to save face and have the sports festivals still continue. In this timeline, Izuku would not actually participate, simply because of the fact that he was not a UA student and they didn't want people to get the wrong idea by having a well-known vigilante just appear on the screens, on their TV screens, have heroes from all across Japan watching a vigilante perform in the sports festival. They simply could not allow that to happen. But while this would be taking place, Izuku would actually be with Tensei Ida, otherwise known as Ingenium. He would actually be patrolling the streets and getting some updates about the sports festival. Apparently, Bakugou would have actually been participating in the sports festival as well. He was, part of the general course, but in the sports festival, he was going to actually be aiming for number 1 here. He was going to make it into the hero course. He would be changing his life around here. This was all because of Izuku's wishes for him. He wanted to genuinely become a better person, and he wanted to save people at the same time. Izuku relit that candle. He relit that fire in Bakugou's heart. His drive to become a hero was back. Now, of course, someone else would be giving a speech at the sports festival. Kirishima, to be specific. When it came on to the speech, it was pretty lackluster. It was okay, for the most part. Bakugou wouldn't really think much about it. He would just be thinking about everything that brought him here. The obstacle course, though. This is where things will be probably one of the most interesting things of this story for Bakugou. Bakugou would have to face off against many other students, but after getting readjusted to his quirk, he would actually have some leverage against most of these students. Most of these students had subpar quirks. Bakugou actually had a quirk that could have gotten him into the hero course a lot earlier if he had wished to actually be part of it. If he had actually still continued to train when he was younger and all of these sort of things, he would have made it into UA if it weren't for the trauma he had after, the death of Izuku all those years ago. It still pained him that he was such an awful person back then. He had grown up so much from there. He was no longer a bully. He was genuinely trying to be a better person, trying to really get people's minds out of these depressing areas in their life. He knew that they would be going through some things in their lives that they just felt like ending it all, and he just would not allow these people to just let their lives go like that. They had so much to live for. They could be able to do so much things in this world if they really desired to do so. Bakugou becoming a hero would be able to show them even more that despite what may have been their backstories, they could always change everything around. They could genuinely become better people. They could genuinely change everything about their lives to where it's not as depressing. They could make a difference in this world. Bakugou would have so much reason to actually become a hero here. But while at the sports festival, he would realize pretty soon that his stamina was not the best. He would run out of gas pretty quickly while using his quirk. Sure, he could probably get through the robots pretty well, but when it came on to flying and all those sort of things, that took up a lot of his energy. he would usually save that for, well, he would actually end up saving the flying part of his quirk for the tightrope. He would go through the tightrope by actually flying all the way across and then landing on a minefield. He would have to recuperate for a little bit, trying to regain his breath because, well, once again, his stamina is not the best here. It's his main limiting factor. He would have to build up that sort of energy back, but Todoroki would actually be the one in the lead here. Some other people would actually begin to take over Bakugou's spot. Bakugou would actually be in 5th place in this time. He wouldn't have made it into like the top 3 or anything, but top 5 was still pretty good. Bakugou would be aiming for 1st though in the cavalry battle. In the cavalry battle, Todoroki actually won 1st place. With him winning 1st place, of course, he would have gotten the 10 million points. His team would basically be running around trying to grab other headbands and keep the 10 million headbands secure at the same time. Bakugou would have been... he would have basically been going for Todoroki. He knew that if he got the 10 million head points, it would basically end up with him being a shoe-in for the next part of the tournament. Tournament, I should say. You already know what I'm talking about. Basically, the last part of the sports festival would be the tournament. If Bakugou was able to get the 10 million hit points, that would mean he would be easily able to get into the tournament brackets. He would be a shoo-in for that portion of the sports festival and really prove that he was worthy of being in the hero course. Izuku would just be watching Bakugou perform in the cavalry battle. He would see his tactical skills taking place here. Izuku would smile a little bit. He would smile a little bit. It would basically be a little smirk, and he would be kind of impressed before he would be leaving to patrol Hosu City with Ingenium. They wouldn't really like each other, obviously for, their past interactions, but they wouldn't let that get the best of them. They wouldn't let that take over because, they didn't really have much of a choice in this matter. They really didn't have much of a choice in the matter. They were basically put into this duo thanks to the hero committee. Basically, the Public Safety Hero Commission. They would have specifically assigned these two to Hosu City. And honestly, there wouldn't be too much happening. They would just be going through the regular checkups with everybody, stopping a few crimes here and there, until the encounter with Stain. When they encountered Stain would immediately try and attack Tensei Ida. He would try and attack Ingenium, thinking that he was a fake hero. He saw the man as a fake hero and would, just try and slash at him, but Izuku would have put a stop to that relatively quickly. He would actually just grab onto his katanas and break them right then and there. Stain would have actually been in shock. He would have been in some shock, but actually grab a couple of his daggers and try to throw them at Izuku, now focusing his attention on Spawn. He would try and attack Izuku, but all of his attacks would be fruitless in the end because most of them would not be able to pierce his skin. As a matter of fact, everything that tried to collide with him, it would just break on contact. Stain would be wondering, what is this guy made of? This must be a joke. Does he have like some sort of hardening quirk? If that's the case, then it's a bit of a bad situation. But at the same time, there's bound to be some sort of weak spot, some sort of Achilles heel with this quirk of his. He wouldn't necessarily know that Izuku has no quirk. He has something completely different here. He would try and continue to attack Izuku, but Izuku would just block most of his attacks and just end up wrapping the hero killer up in his chains. This would quickly immobilize Stain, and Tensei would end up taking out some quick immobilizing handcuffs. He would wrap them around, well, Stain's hands. He would wrap them around, he would basically handcuff Stain, and basically Izuku would release the chains. He would release the chains and he would immediately be sent to prison. He would be arrested, but he would be taken to prison by the police officers, who were quick to arrive on the scene, and Stain's message would never spread. There would be no new recruits for the League of Villains in this timeline. Back at the sports festival though, Bakugou would end up actually not necessarily be able to take home the 10 million hit point band, but managed to actually get second place here. Pretty much like usual, like similar to the original timeline as well. But Bakugou would actually be facing Todoroki. He wouldn't have had to really deal with Shinso. More so that he would have actually just kept his mouth shut the whole time. He already knew how to keep his emotions in check now. He would have kept his emotions in check the whole time and actually just walk up to Shinso, blast him in the face with a pretty big explosion, and it would send him flying outside of the ring. Bakugou would have said that he has already went through some pain in his life. Anything that Shinso would try to say to him wouldn't really matter because he's gone through far worse in his life. Nothing that Shinso could say would really hurt him. He would end up facing Todoroki, and the two boys would have a bit of a challenge. Todoroki would be surprised at the actual strength of Bakugou's explosions, but he still would never use his fire side. He would never use his fire throughout the whole match. Todoroki was not distracted here either, and in the end Todoroki would win. But Bakugou would actually be considered for a seat in the hero course after everything that he had done. He had already proved his worth here, and Aizawa was genuinely interested in him and Shinso. These two would actually make great additions to well, his class. He was really considering what he was going to do with these two. But, well, Bakugou, since he was able to make it so far into the sports festival and they had some room here, well, Bakugou would actually be sent to Aizawa's class. He would actually transfer courses, and everyone would be introduced to Bakugou after the sports festival. Nothing much would really happen in the Hosu arc until the Nomu attack, of course. But that would be for another time, basically. For the meanwhile, though, Bakugou would just be getting himself situated with the rest of the class, and it would just so happen that this would also be the very day that, well, Midnight would be appearing to the class, basically here to, well, get everybody's names, their hero names, in order. They weren't necessarily sure if these were going to be permanent though. So that's why she wanted them to take extra care when it came on to them picking out their hero names. Some of the hero names would be a bit dumb, while others were simple. Then Bakugou's name would be brought up. Bakugou would have gone up onto the podium and revealed his hero name to everyone. It would actually be Kachan. Because of everything that he had gone through with Izuku in this timeline. Izuku was the whole reason for why he was going to become a hero once again. He was the reason why he had pushed himself to actually strive further this time around. Izuku was the reason for why he was able to get this far, and with everything taken into account here, Izuku was basically his whole reason for living again. Izuku was genuinely the greatest thing to ever happen in his life once again. He was the thing to end it, and he was the thing to really turn his life around, to really make him into a likable person, a respectable person to really say the least. He despised his older self, and this was also the reason why he took on the name Kachan, the explosive hero Kachan. Everyone would be a bit confused at first, but Bakugou would explain that this name held a very deep meaning to him. He would explain to them how a friend was basically able to convince him to become a hero once again, and this friend of his was why he was able to get this far in the very first place. He had to thank him for everything, and he would admit to have even being a jerk a couple of years ago as well. A very unlikable person. They probably wouldn't have liked him either. He was never as calm and collected as he usually is with the rest of the class now. Sure, he may have some outbursts. He would yell from time to time, but that's usually when he was cranky, when he didn't have his smoke of the day or something. Everyone would understand, and although they didn't necessarily know this Bakugou all that well just yet, they would accept him. They would accept the name, and everything would just continue from there on. Nothing much happens in the Hosu arc. Sure, there would be a Nomu attack, but Izuku would actually be there to burn through many of them, encase others in shells of earth, which would also immobilize them. People would actually be witnessing Izuku's actions, and some would, of course, be quite wary of the man. After all, he's literally like a giant in Japan. He's like over 6 feet tall. He's full of muscle. He's filled to the brim with muscle, and his face is basically decayed. He has a very disfigured face, you could say. Many would not want to see him without his mask on, and even when he does have his mask on, he's still quite intimidating. He looks quite scary, to be honest. Many would run away in fear of him, but some would actually thank him for his work. Izuku would be commended for his contribution in the end. Ida would have never actually went with Manuel in this timeline. He would have been with his brother. He would have actually been interning with his brother in this timeline. After all, well, Tensei was never injured in this timeline. He would have actually been saved by Izuku, and Stain is no longer a threat in this timeline. Izuku would have been commended, but All Might would be one of the heroes to be wary of Izuku's powers. Izuku, after all, did show that he has multiple powers, and this claim about having some relation to this demon of the sorts, yeah, he wasn't really buying it, to be honest. He had a feeling that All For One had some role to play with this character. He had some understandable suspicion, but he would be proven wrong eventually. Heroes like Night Eye would of course also be hesitant, but willing to give the boy a chance. He knew that he would be a great asset to have after all. He saw what he did at Hosu City, basically. He saw what Izuku was able to do at Hosu City, and he also heard what Izuku did at the USJ as well. On top of that, he heard what this kid was able to do against people like Todoroki, one of the strongest members of the hero course, and a hero in training after all. This young adult was going to go far if he actually continued to move up. If he continued to go along the same path as he is right now, he would prove to be one of the greatest assets to hero society in general. He had high hopes for this kid. That's all you need to know. Final exams would happen, and Izuku would end up being recruited by Night Eye during this time to do some patrolling. Night Eye wouldn't necessarily tell him about the Yakuzas and his suspicions about them. Not just yet. No. But Izuku would end up sensing the negative emotions while patrolling the streets. He would stop a couple of crimes under the consent of Night Eye. Everything he could end up blaming Night Eye for in the very end. If the heroes tried to stop him saying that he was doing vigilante work once again, he would basically be able to say that he was under the guide of Night Eye. He would even be willing to call him up if they really needed further proof. He'd bump into a little girl with long white hair and a small horn around their forehead though, while he was patrolling. While he was stopping those couple of crimes and everything, he would look down at the little girl and sense their emotional state. He wondered why they were wearing bandages as well. He would actually touch her forehead and read her mind. He'd see all of her memories and immediately snatch her up in his arms, refusing to let go of her. Eri, she didn't even want to be let go either. She could feel the more gentle sort of hug he was giving her, this sort of embrace that he was giving her. It was unlike anything she'd ever felt before. Izuku would refuse to let go of her and teleport away with her. He would have created a portal and stepped through it. He would leave the scene right when Overhaul was about to catch her. He would have been confused seeing this and be angry as well. Izuku would actually be able to teleport back to Night Eye's agency with the little girl in his hand, and before Night Eye could have any sort of questions, he would immediately transfer the memories into his mind. Night Eye would simply say that, very well then. He would still try and get some more information to incriminate Overhaul. After all, it would end up being his word against against Overhauls at the very end if he didn't get more substantial evidence to really incriminate Overhaul. But for now, the girl would be kept within his custody. He would be kept in Night Eye's custody, and when it came on to Overhaul, he would basically be sending out search parties. He would now know where to look for more information. And when it came on to the little girl, he would also be trying to get some therapists for her. After all, she had gone through a lot of trauma as she was growing up, and she probably was still going through some nightmares as they were speaking. Izuku would leave and meet up with Momo. She would be telling him everything that had been going on, and she would even inform him about the fact that his mother and sister were now at the Yaoyorozus and how their final exams went. Bakugou was actually able to do fairly well in the final exams, facing off against Ectoplasm, and Izuku would have been kind of proud of Bakugou in this version. He wouldn't necessarily like him or anything, but he'd be proud of the fact that he was actually reforming himself. He was actually making even more of a difference here. He was really trying to become a hero, and not just for some petty reasons either. It was so that he could really pay a debt to Izuku. He was repaying his debt. He was becoming a hero, like he had always dreamed to be. He was living out the dream for both of them. Izuku, hearing that his mother and sister were at the Yaoyorozu household, he would obviously feel, pretty happy. He would feel that they were in good hands, but at the back of his mind, he would hear Malbogia's voice, telling him to still be hesitant. Be afraid of trust. Do not trust everybody here. Don't get too comfortable here. That's basically all he's saying, because he knows how things go. When you get too comfortable, that's when life likes to throw a curveball at you. When you get too comfortable, that's when life becomes an absolute hell. Little would Izuku know, though, it would be that all for one, he would actually be plotting against him the whole time. He would have actually ended up getting in contact with the Yakuzas. He didn't necessarily have a full team just yet, but by getting in contact with the Yakuzas and showing his sort of influence over the years, alongside the Nomu that he had in his possession as well, they would end up making a sort of alliance, you could say. This alliance would include them basically working together for the forest training arc. You could say basically they would be going up to the mountains and causing some panic, causing quite a bit of commotion. They would basically also be trying to sniff out the one known as Spawn. They would be trying to get the attention of Spawn all throughout this time, and Overhaul would also be informed of the fact that his parents, his mother and sister, were actually at the Yaoyorozu household. So it would basically be that Overhaul would be sent to kill those two, and all for one, he would be dealing with everything else. He would be dealing with he would be dealing with All Might. He would be dealing with the students. He would basically be dealing with just slaughtering as many students as possible during this training that they were supposed to be having. All thanks to the UA traitor. All of this information being gathered, and with everything being just sent to the palm of his hand, really. Everything was now in his palm. He had everything in his palm, and he would just be laughing the whole time. Things would just be a mess the whole time at the, Forest Lodge. Ever since the first day, things were a mess, but once they were doing a challenge of the brave, challenge of the week, challenge, this sort of challenge, they were basically meant to go up against some of their classmates and basically, try and scare each other. It was meant to be a fun activity until there was a bunch of commotion. A bunch of trees just started falling down, and All For One would have actually sent out for some help, even more help from the Yakuzas and other randos as well, other random villains. He would actually be able to get the likes of Muscular, Dobby, and that's pretty much about it. Those were the main ones that he was able to get alongside Moonfish. He was basically able to get their cooperation in this, and on top of that, he would also be able to get a bunch of other random villains that he frankly did not care too much about. They were just pawns in the grand scheme of things, because they would all just be bowing down before All For One at the very end of this. All For One would have gathered everyone, and the forest would be set on fire. Kota would actually die here because there would be no one to actually protect him from Muscular. It would also be a slaughter for many of the students as well. The only students that are really surviving here are, not much. Actually, I would say that a good portion would still survive. It would mainly be the weaker ones of the classes that really died. They wouldn't have been strong enough to really face off against Muscular, even with the couple of more years they had on themselves. This didn't necessarily mean that they had a better chance against Muscular. No, Muscular was still strong. Muscular still trained for 5 more years. He still had time to train himself, even if he had to do it in secret, even if he had to find other ways to really think of how to use his quirk. He would have ended up even sparring with some of the Nomus beforehand, just really getting his muscles back into shape, so that he would be even more of a threat here. He was just going on a mass genocide. He was killing students left and right. The main ones that were surviving here were Momo, Todoroki, Uraraka, Bakugou. Those were the students. They would be the ones to survive. People like Sugar Rush, they stood no chance. Oh no, I'm sorry, honey. Izuku would have heard about all of this and teleported immediately to their location. He would have made quick work of most of the villains, but people like Muscular, they were kind of tricky. But he realized that trying to spare these guys, it would be fruitless. It would basically be too much effort right now, and it would be too time consuming. So he basically offed these guys as well. He would have killed Muscular, he would have killed Moonfish, he wouldn't have necessarily killed Dobby, but he would have ripped off one of his arms, which would have drastically decreased his effectiveness in battle. He would have been screaming in pain, he would have been screaming blood-curdling screams, he would have been yelling bloody murder, all of this stuff, until he actually had to face getting teleported away by Kurogiri. Kurogiri would actually teleport him to their master's lair. Well, he would actually teleport him to Overhaul. He would actually teleport him to Overhaul, where he would have to face a man. This man would actually show his mother and his sister. Overhaul would just have a wicked grin on his face, informing Izuku of the fact that he basically stole something of value to him. He basically took away something that was precious to him and his goals. So now he would have to watch as he did the same to his mother and sister. Izuku was confused at first until he saw Overhaul take off one of his gloves and touch his mother's head, causing it to explode on contact. Izuku was livid as soon as he saw this. He immediately sent his chains at Overhaul and dragged him towards himself. He would have punched Overhaul in the face with so much strength that it actually broke his jaw. He would have tried to send some fire at Overhaul, but Overhaul would actually try and touch Izuku. Izuku would have actually felt something try and, well, take over, try and make his body explode, but he would try and keep everything in contact. He did have a healing factor after all. He could control his body composition and everything along those lines. It would be like a tingling feeling to him. It would feel like his body is constantly on the verge of exploding, but he would be trying to take down Overhaul. He would have actually ripped Overhaul to shreds, but unfortunately his sister had to see all of this. She was traumatized as well. She did not know how to react. She wanted to scream, but no sound was coming out of her mouth. She just fainted after seeing what she saw. Izuku would have teleported back. He would have actually teleported his sister away from the scene and to Night Eye's custody. He trusted Night Eye to take care of her for right now. He had to attend to the others. He would have actually teleported away, and although it was painful, he would have had to deal with the fact that his body was basically, how should I say it? Basically atomizing itself and reforming itself every time he teleported. It hurt every single time, but it made for some convenience. He had to do it if he really wanted to save as many people as he could. He would be trying. He would try and fight as many of the villains. He would try and save as many people, but he would realize that not everybody would be savable here. He would have so much blood on his hands at the very end, but he would manage to save just a couple of people. Just a couple of people. It was better than nothing in his mindscape. He still regretted the fact that he couldn't be in the same place all at once. He would realize this and he would just choke up. He would start to cry and punch himself. He would beat on himself because of the fact that he was unable to make it in time to stop all of this from happening. Not everyone would blame him though. No one would actually blame him in the end though. Although, he now needed to know who was the culprit behind all of this. He demanded to know. And his wish would be granted actually. He would actually be introduced to All For One not too long later. All For One would actually appear at the Forest Lodge. He would just laugh at the scene, mentioning how this is what happens when you mess with All For One. All For One would introduce himself as well, All For One, and bring up how everything was just going according to plan. He must have felt quite broken right now. Everyone here would just feel the amount of bloodlust coming off of All For One, and really, they would just start to buckle up. No one would have expected for such a person to exist. All For One would have been using multiple quirks against Izuku. Izuku would have had to face off against All For One, and you would realize quickly that this guy was no joke. He would have to push himself beyond his limits. He would have to push himself beyond the limits he'd ever had to go through. He would absorb the negative energy, the negative emotions, the negativity of everyone here, and just use it to fill up his energy, cause him to go through a transformation, just like Shigaraki had stated. And he would witness the horns. He would witness wings actually form as well. He would witness Izuku grow to a larger stature. His muscles would become much more detailed here. He would be now fighting All For One with enhanced speeds and strength. He would go for mainly punches. He would be ripping him to shreds. He would be punching All For One over and over again. He would be hammering him into the ground. All For One was not expecting this. He would try and get Izuku off of him, but Izuku would end up using green flames against him. He would send energy spears at the man. He would be throwing everything at All For One, everything that he had in his arsenal. He would use that against All For One. He would even use his axe. He would turn his cloak into an axe and shoot at All For One. All For One would just be trying to block everything, try and get away from Izuku. But Izuku, he refused to really back down here. Every single moment it seemed like Izuku's strength was just doubling over and over. What was this kid? All For One was trying to figure this out. He never thought that he would ever have to face somebody stronger than All Might, but this kid was proving to be quite the troublesome pest. He couldn't even get a hit in anymore. Izuku was just that strong and fast. It was ridiculous in the end. But All For One would realize soon that this was all fruitless. He was never going to win. He had signed his fate from the very beginning. He had really signed a deal with the devil here. And this is how I will end it. All For One would have died here. All Might would have witnessed this, and he wouldn't have anything to say. He would have just accepted it and reveal his sorry state to Izuku. He had already retired from a while ago, but here now he will be seeing everything. He will be seeing everything from this man and realize how pathetic All Might really was. he would realize this, but not really even care at this point. He just wanted to go home. He would have to reform Hero Society, but for now, he just wanted to rest. He was tired. He was tired of it all. He didn't want anyone to go through such tragedies again, which was why in the upcoming years he would actually apply for a hero license. He would actually pass, and he would actually become a full-fledged hero, climbing up the ranks and really showing people that these guys were not to be messed with any longer. He was basically going to show that this is a new generation of heroes, and with this being said, he had no problems killing. After all, it just seemed better to just kill off some of these villains instead of just letting them live. After all, letting a villain live was what was the reason why his mother died, on top of many others, all because he let some villains live. And the crime rates were drastically lower with Izuku in position here. Bakugou would have been his right-hand man at the very end of this, and they would have climbed to the very top. Bakugou would have been like around 2nd or 3rd place, constantly swapping in and out with Todoroki. Todoroki would have just kept to his ice though, until Izuku told him to use his fire as well. He refused to let some civilians die just because of his pettiness, just because of the fact that he had some daddy issues in the past. Think about the greater picture here. This is what Izuku would get into Todoroki's mind, and he would have no choice but to agree in the very end. He would agree to use his fire and ice, and he would prove to become a far more effective hero. Todoroki would actually thank Izuku in the end as well. And once again, the crime rates were drastically lower, to the point where people would feel safe to walk out into town basically with all sorts of expensive jewelry. They could now no longer have to worry about villains popping in and out, trying to take over their bodies, trying to rob them, all of these sort of things. They no longer had to worry about any of this. So now they would see Izuku in a better light now. He would still be kind of scary, but he would also be seen as the #1 hero. And they would accept any and all of his methods because they would prove to be effective in the very end. And they would also be raised in the next generation of heroes to follow in his footsteps. And that's how I will be ending off this video all. Sorry that this took so long to record. Things basically have been kind of loud at my house for the past couple of days, or well, week. So I wasn't really able to record like that. But that's all I have to really say. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. King Ty next. Out!